welcome everyone to a special episode. With everything going on with COVID and just even in general, people dealing with trauma, I really want to bring in an expert with a special therapy that I even use personally. I'm really excited to be sharing Stephanie Wood here. She is an EFT trainer and practitioner. And I'm going to send it to you, Stephanie, so you can introduce yourself and your background and tell us a little bit about what EFT is.
Okay, hi. So I am an EFT, master trainer, and I've been a practitioner since 2001. And EFT stands for Emotional Freedom Technique, and it is a mind-body technique that can help with a whole range of issues, emotional issues, even physical issues. It's kind of like emotional acupressure without the needles. So, and I also have created something called Ultra EFT because I've been doing this for so many years. Things have evolved and I'm always loving to learn new things. So I love to bring it into EFT and incorporate and create new modalities through it. And Ultra stands for Understanding Life Through Realization and Awareness. And that basically is still the regular EFT protocol, which is a very simple technique. It literally looks like this. You're tapping on acupressure points. You go through this one single algorithm. It literally, that's one round of EFT. It's that simple, and so it's really nice because people can learn to do it for themselves. The Ultra brings in an understanding that I have found makes it a lot easier and less painful than going into your past and having to kind of drag up everything and deal with it. So, yeah, and so right now in this times, it's so wonderful to have a tool to share with people and. That can really help with all the uncertainty and all the emotions that are coming up. And so many people are on emotional roller coasters right now. You know, there's just so much happening. And even if you're feeling calm, I've talked to so many people who feel good, but yet they're like, there's this background noise of, maybe it's fear, maybe it's, maybe they're drinking a little more than they should, maybe they're eating a little more, they don't know why. Even though they seem happy, they're like, there's something going on. So it can really address all of that.
Yeah, and I know just even recently, like there's nothing really I'm scared about or stressed about. But with quarantine, I have my in-laws here. Came visiting, but they kind of got stuck here because of quarantine. And it's like a whole different environment in the house. And so my anxiety has popped up. And so I've been managing that with EFT and, my diet and meditation. And it's something small. Like I couldn't realize where my anxiety was coming from, but it's like, oh, your whole environment changed. So there's a whole energy shift there. And that some people may be doing all right, but they can't really figure out where that's like you said, something in the back of their head or just something feels off. I generally found EFT a few years back when I was studying about mindset, and this was one of those things to help you with some of your limiting beliefs, especially if the normal journaling and affirmations weren't really working. So I don't remember how long EFT has been around. So can you tell us about the history and how it kind of came around?
Sure. It's been around since the 90s. And it's something that morphed from this fellow, Dr. Roger Callahan, who did something called, what did we do? It was a tapping technique as well, but it was very complicated. So if you had a stomach ache, you tapped here and here. And if you had a fear of water, it was this point. And so it was this very complicated algorithm. And so the salt field therapy, that's what it's called. So one of his students, Gary Craig, who was a Stanford engineer, he's not even in the personal growth industry, he took that training and he really thought it through with that engineer's mind. I think he thought, well, how can I simplify this? Do I really need to go through every point? And he basically came up with a protocol that touched upon almost every acupressure meridian and picked a point so that you just do the same one every time. He thought, well, why don't I just hit all the meridians? And it's based on the acupressure system. If anybody's not familiar with that, if you've ever gone to a Chinese doctor or gotten needles, everything's connected. So there's qi that runs through your whole body. So he thought, if I can get the qi running while people are focused on their problem, then something happens, and they witnessed that things were happening. People's fears were falling away as they'd start saying this fear, this fear, this fear, and bringing up the issue. And they were really surprised at what was happening. And it just really kind of evolved from there. And in the beginning, Gary Craig would say, try it on everything. And he gave it away for free. And he was really excited to get this out to the world. And then a whole bunch of us jumped on and learned, and it's really evolved so much since the 90s. There's organizations, there's more protocols, there's stricter training, but it really has been used for everything from sports performance to people with asthma to, I mean, it really, it's just unbelievable and mindset and clearing out so much of the, those limiting core beliefs that aren't true. We can really shift how we see ourselves and how we are in the world. So,
I've seen it happen for a lot of people, and even for me, I felt that. I was like, this is weird when I first learned
yeah,
it.
looks
I
weird,
don't
right?
really feel comfortable just tapping and talking along because I did a guided one. But I'm going to admit it really works. Like sometimes through some limiting beliefs that I had in the past, I had to do several different sessions before I actually felt a difference. And there were some where I just felt absolutely lighter right afterwards. And it's really been helpful. What do you think it is when it comes to like the meridians and actually speaking these words while you're doing the process that actually helps feeling better or removing some of these beliefs or the physical, I guess you could say, issues really clearing up?
So the scientific research that's been, the body of that's been starting to grow, they've really focused on the role of the amygdala, the fight or flight response in the brain, and have noticed that as you tap and you're tuned into an issue, it calms the amygdala. So something, a memory, for example, of something traumatic that may have happened, where as soon as you think about it, your heart rate starts to go up, or you get teary or afraid. As you tap and you're focused on this thing, I don't think anyone's gotten really clear on the specific mechanism of how it works, but they have definitely correlated that the amygdala kind of just calms down. Also, it's been there's been studies showing that it lowers cortisol levels, which are the stress levels that can cause extra, padding around your gut, like all that, So there are studies that are showing this, which is very exciting. I'm happy that people are doing research. Coming from more of a Chinese, traditional Chinese medicine background, is sort of more my background. I see it as in traditional Chinese medicine, the premise behind that is that all pain is due to some kind of obstruction. And that can be physical pain or emotional pain. So if you imagine that there's a system in that our body is at its, when it's left alone, it's in a natural, healthy state. So it's an obstruction that will cause a problem. So I really see it as kind of like when you go for acupuncture, or acupressure, that it's kind of like your whole chi is just running around your whole body all the time. So let's say something comes up and you get in a car accident, for example. So there's a trauma that happens, and let's say you've hurt your shoulder or your neck. And then for some reason, the natural core, your body will naturally heal, but sometimes it doesn't. And you're like, why isn't it healing? So what happens is, if you imagine that there's some blockage, that something has been pinched, or there's an emotional blockage because of the trauma gets caught in there, or your anger about the person who hit you might be caught in there. There's a whole bunch of things, or you're mad at the insurance agency, all these things kind of sit in there unresolved sometimes, and they can really hold things in place. So when you start to tap, and when you're tapping on these acupressure points, it's like you're forcing the chi around your body. So instead of just sitting there stagnating and it keeps hitting the spot and hurting and hitting the spot and hurting, you're kind of forcing it through. And then your body, in its own wisdom, kind of goes, hey, wait a minute, the energy's flowing around and I'm okay, even though this thing is still there. And somehow it gets in a different relationship with that. And what that looks like is usually that it goes away or dissolves. And so all of a sudden the energy is running around and you're feeling great. It starts to release so that your body can do its natural healing.
There is some science research about how we can harbor some of our like emotional pain and it'll manifest in actually physical pain. And I need to find some of that research and I'll probably share those articles in the description. But I like that idea that that's what it's doing, just kind of forcing that flow to actually cleanse through it. And that sometimes our physical pains are just manifestations of something that might be bothering us. And a lot of times it's really buried deep down. So how do you feel that limiting beliefs really affect not just our mindset, but our lives and our, our physical health?
Well, I kind of see it like there's this, often the limiting beliefs are unconscious for us. They're that hidden thinking, but yet it's playing in the background. It's like we might not know it until we get triggered. So something happens and you're like, oh my gosh, like this old thing that comes up, like, oh my God, I'm too stupid to do that. Or, oh, I can't get out in the spotlight, or, oh, whatever the thing is, I'm not good enough to do that. And it gets triggered by something we've seen or heard or read even. People get really triggered by Facebook. I just had 2 sessions this week on people who were freaked out by Facebook.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is fascinating to me because it's such a, it was about being seen and the likes and how they perceived it. And so what happens is when we have a limiting core belief that is never true, and it was a decision that a conclusion that we drew when we were maybe 6 or 2 or 10.
Mm-hmm.
It's a child's decision that was made about life that made sense in the moment, that helped, we believed would help keep us safe, and we're carrying it through life. It ends up unconsciously becoming a filter of how we see the world.
Yeah.
And so we start to make everything fit in with that. So we start to have more experiences and it matches up with that belief. Oh yeah, I'm not good enough. Look, this just happened to me. And so you start to, it kind of just creates these filters in how we see the world. So with the tapping and with an understanding of what they really are, as those filters that are not true at all fall away, then we get to be with what is with clarity. It's not personal. We're okay. Like all that stuff isn't true. And you all of a sudden, it's like you're a new person because you're just more you without all the, the endless,
Yes.
we all have it. Everybody's walking around with something, right? So does that make sense?
No, that makes total sense to me. The first thing that came to mind when you were talking about how some of those unlimited belief or limiting beliefs be in the background, I kind of can compare it to when I used to work at the restaurant, and I used to work at Outback, and they'll play like that weird Australian music in the background because that was just the theme in the late 90s, early 2000s. And half the time I had guests ask me and say, doesn't the music bother you? And I'm like, I've been here for so long that it's just in the background. I don't even notice it, but it's still in the background. But when there's a song that I can't stand comes on, it's almost like blazing. You can definitely pay attention to it. You're like, okay, now I hear it. Or a happy song. So that kind of reminds me, it's like whenever you're triggered, that might be something like that. You just don't know it's in the background, but it's always playing in the background. And it can affect us day to day. And how do you think that these limiting core beliefs really create us to make I wouldn't say bad decisions, but decisions that are against what we really want to do?
Yes, decisions that don't serve our highest self, and people do it all the time. And those unconscious or hidden beliefs that sometimes we are aware of, but we just don't know what to do with them. You're like, I know that's in there. They basically are those things that end up creating self-sabotage in every area. You kind of go, hey, I want to start exercising. I want to get in shape. And then there's something in there that you just can't get yourself moving, or you start and you burn yourself out, whatever that is. Oh, and then you have this, well, I never finish anything, or, oh, I'm a quitter. And so it's just kind of, that will kick in at some point because of those limiting beliefs. So it can really affect everything. There isn't really an area that it won't affect. It can affect your relationships. People who are in abusive relationships. Why are they there? Their self-esteem, their beliefs about themselves are so strong that they're not good enough to have a happy relationship, or they're not worthy. That's such a big one. I'm not worthy to have a happy life or to have it all. Yeah. And so people end up staying in situations and just keep replaying out this thing where they don't realize that they're actually really tuned into the belief and not to who they really are.
So I'm going to ask a few questions based on, like, let's say the audience doesn't know, like, how long would EFT take to work?
It totally depends on the nature and depth of the issue. So, okay, so for example, the fear, it can work really well with fears and phobias. So I've had clients over all these years come in with a fear of flying. That's not an uncommon issue that people want to get over because they want to visit family or something. Well, I've had clients that have come in and it's cleared in almost half a session because it was a single incident trauma, small t trauma, that they got freaked out on a plane. And it was one time, and ever since then, it's still every time they get on a plane, they think of that. So that cleared up like that. I had another woman who she ended up actually, this is a strange one. She actually treated her at a party. It was like a 15-minute session. And it wasn't about a fear of flying. It was actually about a cheese allergy and a wheat allergy that she had developed. She had been on a plane and she was eating cheese and crackers, and I guess they had a bunch of turbulence. And so we just cleared that memory, and ever since then, she's been able to eat cheese and crackers again.
That's wild.
Right?
Develop an allergy to that because of what oh, wow.
Because our brain does that.
Yeah.
Whatever is happening at the time, it hooks into whatever's going on in your body or what you've eaten or what you've seen. So some people get triggered by the color red because they were in a trauma and they were in a red room or something like that. So that's where the triggers come in. They're just something that may have been unconsciously coupled with the experience and the emotion. So, yeah, I was running with that. Oh, so the fear of flying. So it can be 20 minutes. It can be one session. I had another client who it actually took about 8 to 10 sessions to clear it. But what was fascinating about that was the fear of flying was like the handle of a bucket. This is what she came in with. I have a fear of flying. I need to fly. What we started to uncover was that in that bucket was a fear of death, a fear of being in enclosed places, a fear of authority, a fear, like she had this basket of about 8 to 10 massive, really core fears that we needed to pick away until that one finally just fell away at the end. But it couldn't go until the other ones were gone. So that took longer, but what was really cool about that was by the end, she was like clear of all the fears. She felt like amazing. She got like a new life. She was just feeling great. So that was, so you just really don't know, but it can happen really fast. And the nice thing is with tapping is you can learn to do it on yourself. So it's not like you have to go to a practitioner for every session, but to get to some of the deeper stuff, it can really help if you're finding that things aren't shifting.
Yeah. You kind of answered one of my questions, but then one popped up was, if someone knew something was off, they just didn't know what the underlying issue was, could they come to a session and figure that out or work through it? Or is it something that they kind of need to have like a general idea what it is?
For something like that, I would totally recommend seeing a practitioner, any kind of accredited EFT practitioner, because we are trained to do that detective work. That's kind of what the training does. It helps you to work with people to get to the root of what's going on. Now, what's interesting is our brains want to know what the source of the problem is. We're fact-finding machines, these brains of ours, and we want to know, we want to understand it, we want to figure it out. But the reality is that it may be that along the course of something, if you're feeling off, that you do uncover what it is, and you may do it in the session. It may be afterwards where it dawns on you what it is, or it could be as simple as you don't end up naming what it is, but you've tapped around it enough that it doesn't matter, it's gone. So at the end of the day, does it matter if we know what it was?
As long as it's gone, I think people will just be happy.
Yeah.
So what is the difference between EFT and your strategy or your way called Ultra EFT? You did talk about what Ultra meant, but could you share the differences?
Sure. So regular EFT, which is super powerful, and I highly recommend it to everyone, it often involves getting very specific on your issue and trying to go back to find a memory of where that began. So you're always kind of trying to get to the root of it so that you kind of just pull the root out and deal with that issue. And sometimes an issue has many roots or many, they call them tabletops and legs. So let's say you've got fear of being some kind of a fear, you don't feel safe. Well, maybe you were abused when you were a kid and maybe it happened 100 times. So there are ways to get at that with a practitioner where you just keep pulling off the legs and the cool thing is you don't have to get it all the legs. At some point, it just collapses because they're usually similar incidents. Now, over the years that I've been doing this for myself, I don't have clear memories from my childhood. So when I went into it, I was like, oh, I want to work on stuff, and I can't remember anything. So I had to get really creative over the years because I couldn't access those specific memories. I worked with people, I just couldn't. That was blocked to me. And I found that with clients too. I'd occasionally run into a client with that. So I'd always have been on a search for ways to deal with it differently, because we don't all have that kind of recollection. So regular EFT, they will try to get you down that path or imagine that. With Ultra EFT, it's more about the understanding that we don't need to go to the past at all. So this was really freeing for me when I came upon the principles behind this. And I learned it, and it wasn't connected with tapping, but what I realized was I could bring that understanding and that teaching into the tapping. And what I started to notice was people were getting results so much faster, less tears, less time. It was really, and it was carrying through. It's not that EFT doesn't stick because it does, but you have to keep getting at the aspects. But when you start to bring in the understanding that it's all the same thing, and that you don't have to do anything about it, that it's all in the realm of thought and feeling, and we actually don't have to fix it or change it. There's something so freeing that, like I had a client, she came for about 4 sessions for some anxiety about one thing. And she said, I talked to her, it's been about 2 years. And she said, I keep thinking I'm going to need to come see you again. She came in for dental fears. And then she realized she was not having fears about this other issue that she had. And she's like, I don't know, my anxiety's just gone, because she saw the truth of what that thinking and feeling was. So I don't know if that makes sense. It's a little hard to explain in a nutshell, because it's about an understanding of how we work as humans. But with tapping, when you're learning it, it's really relaxing, and the world becomes much more neutral. You're just like, oh, this is neutral. It's not personal. Like, you're so free from having to do so much to fix ourselves. Like, there's nothing about us that's broken. We just forget that.
I think it makes completely sense, and hopefully it does for some of the audience. And I think the feeling of that freeing is what we're all striving for. That's where we're getting our pain and blockages, because we're so worried about how we're being seen, or, whatever our fears and limiting beliefs are. And that's an amazing technique to where they can get to a point where if we do, it's something that they don't have to keep coming back every time an issue comes up with you. It's, they have some sessions with you, and then it's something they can work on themselves in the future. And it's like, oh, this issue is coming up, but really it doesn't matter because you know the truth.
Yes,
so that's awesome.
Yeah. And my goal is so people don't see me. Like, I don't want people to keep seeing me. I'm like, I want you to be free, so that you really, isn't that what we all are doing as coaches and practitioners?
Yeah.
And,
I want to work until I don't need to work anymore. Like that.
Exactly.
So, I'm trying to think of a question, how to phrase this question actually. How safe is EFT? I think
in terms of, sorry?
Is there, this is why I'm trying to phrase the question correctly. Yeah. When I say how safe it is, people might be wondering in the audience, is there any residual after effects? Like you mentioned, like, you don't want people to come back, but if the issue comes up again, can they do sessions, or could it bring up deeper things?
Yes, that's an awesome question. So depending on a person's experience, like, let's say they've got some deep trauma, and I used to work for most of all my early years, I worked with really intense issues like depression, anxiety, and a lot of big trauma, like sexual trauma and abuse. And so you really, if you you've had this kind of history, and that you get easily triggered, or you're like a highly sensitive person, I really recommend working with a practitioner, because if you it's kind of like, and it's not to scare anyone, but you don't want to like open Pandora's box because
Yeah.
if you're not equipped with the tools to handle that, it can be very overwhelming. So from that perspective, we do say, try it on everything and be careful when you're using it. Yeah. So, but in terms of residual stuff, the really other than that kind of thing, where if you've had old trauma, that it can be, and I hate to say like reopen because I don't actually see that's how it works, but if it can feel that way because we tap into the old memories that get opened and then we experience them. If we think about them, then we experience them. And that can be very painful for some people. So like this has been used with war vets. There's actually the U.S. Veterans Association, this is on their list of therapies that can be used with vets. It's that powerful for PTSD. But if you know that you've got PTSD, you definitely want to work with a practitioner because you don't want to be left by yourself in this state of, in terms of a session, the only real things that I've ever experienced in all these years is people report feeling really tired after a session sometimes, like they'll just need to sleep. And some people are energized, but more often it just takes a day or two of just, oh, okay, they're processing their systems. It's like kind of like when you're in a session, it's like a snow globe, when you shake it up and you're like, oh my gosh, all the things are shaken up and some of the things have been cleared. There is more space, but then some of the things that are there need to settle. And when they're settling, it can be mildly uncomfortable or tired, but not usually. It's usually pretty calming and comfortable. People often say after a session, they're like, it feels like emotional massage.
Yeah, I was just thinking that's the word that came. It's like having a massage.
Totally. It's totally like that.
Oh, well, that's good to know. So hopefully that's a better picture of what people kind of would experience through a session, regardless if it was, like I don't want to compare traumas, but like PTSD versus like they're going into a fear of flying, it all will work out the way it is. And I think that whole tiredness, I've never felt that way, but I also didn't work on really deep issues for myself. But I can see that you're kind of letting go of this load that you've had carried for who knows how long. And so like your body's like, okay, that was a lot of work. I'm gonna rest and process this.
Totally, right? And sometimes it's a whole new way of being. Like if you spent your whole life thinking, oh, I'm like, whatever that core belief is, let's say you're walking around with, I'm not good enough, for example. And let's say it clears in a session. I always say that it pops. Well, sometimes it's like, I don't know if you remember, but like they used to call it a defrag of a computer, where it's like it takes all the stuff and kind of reconfigures it and your system just needs to do that because it's not used to thinking that. And all of a sudden it starts hitting it. But when it sees that none of those things are true, it's like, this does not compute. It's kind of this like,
it's like when you're updating your computer, it's like, we need to restart for these things to work.
Totally. It's totally like that. Yeah. So for that reason, some people get tired. Like I said, some people get super energized. Most people feel awesome after a session. I mean, that's the truth of when you have a session. I'm talking about the more serious things, but even with those serious things, often people will feel really, really calm and centered and a sense of spaciousness at the end of a session, which is not a bad place to be.
It is not a bad place to be. And I was just thinking, I've done a couple Reiki sessions where I did feel lighter and just more at peace. But one session, I was just kind of really exhausted right after. And another session, I was super energized. So I think it's just really depends, and it's going to depend on the person as well.
Totally.
Well, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your probably crazy busy day to share all your knowledge. Is there anything else you would really like the audience to walk away with about EFT?
Oh, just to try it for yourself. There's a whole bunch of videos out there, and EFT trainers, we don't always like that there's all these tap along videos because it doesn't really teach you how to do it. So what I would like people to walk away with is try those videos and know that that's not the whole of EFT, and to go get trained properly so that you know how to do it, because it's so powerful and you can just do it you can do it on yourself. It's a great tool for self-help and just self-care to have at any time. So yeah.
Well, I'm really excited to have you today, and hopefully I was able to share with you audience another way to kind of do some self-care, work through those limiting beliefs, and another tool under your belt. So if you had any aha moments, please share in the comments below. I'll make sure to tag Stephanie, so if you do have any questions, Stephanie can answer as well. This will be posted on my Facebook page and the Income Statement TV channel on YouTube.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. This is wonderful.
Thank you.
All right.